Stories from the Growing Years by Arleta Richardson. Chapter 10. Prayers of Faith.
Alma is praying for a little sister,
I told Sarah Jane as we sat on the riverbank and tried to catch a breath of cool air.
I'm praying for a speedy arrival of whichever it is.
I know what you mean. It's hard enough to move in this weather when there's only one of you to carry around. Jessica can't wait for Alma to come and stay with us.
Claire can't wait to go and stay with Grandpa. I think both the children are disappointed when I get up in the morning. You'd think I was in the habit of beating them every day. They're so anxious to get out of the house.
You know that both of them will be ready to come back before the week is out. We all look forward to something different once in a while. What do you say we have a picnic out here tonight? I think we could get Thomas and Len to make some ice cream.
Wonderful. I have some ham to slice and fixings for a potato salad. Do you have some of those baked beans left? Maybe Elizabeth and Philip and Colleen and Lorenzo would like to come.
The heat was forgotten as we planned an evening of fellowship with our friends.
For a few hours, the grown-ups will outnumber the children,
Sarah Jane said. She jumped up and pulled me to my feet.
Go in and call them, and I'll pick some blueberries for the ice cream. You lie down for an hour, and I'll take the children with me.
As I walked slowly to the house, I thought how blessed I was to have a friend like Sarah Jane. She was the strong, solid one to lean on, while I seemed to be the one who needed propping up. The others were delighted with the plan and offered to bring fresh rolls, coleslaw, and pickles. It promised to be a nice evening. As usual, we heard the news from the mill. One of the stampers tells me that we have log pirates near a banking ground, Philip reported. They found a stack of our ends when they were out checking the flow.
Your ends of what?
I asked.
Logs,
Thomas explained.
When we bank our trees by the river to wait for the spring run, a stamper hammers Jerome's ownership mark at the ends of the logs. About this time of year, we usually get a bunch of renegades who like to have their work done for them. They camp along the river and watch for any logs that floated out of the main drive, then cut off the ends and put their own stamps on them.
Some of them have the brass to try to sell them back to Jerome, Philip said. Fortunately, his buyers can tell a fresh stamp from one that's been wintered. There's no way to tell whose logs they've pirated, though, unless you catch them at it. We could set guards out here, but chances are they've moved on to another location by now. Jerome seems to think that our loss is minimal and what little they gain isn't worth a fight. We have enough of those just because the men are bored.
We certainly have, Elizabeth agreed. You should see some of the sights that show up at my office door. You wouldn't want to smell them either.
She shuddered and wrinkled her nose.
You can tell right away that they've had something stronger than ginger water or molasses in their field jugs that day. I won't let them in the room.
I grinned as I thought of tiny Elizabeth standing up to a 6-foot bruiser and refusing him entrance to her office. I took one of those odorous fellows into the hospital in Saginaw just this week, Len said. Fortunately, he happened to be one who had brought insurance there because it's going to take a while for his leg to heal. He shook his head. That's a hard way to find out that alcohol and a ripsaw don't mix well.
What was he doing with a ripsaw at this time of year?
I inquired.
Cleaning and sharpening it,
Len replied. He was testing it on a log.
What good is the insurance going to do for him if he doesn't die?
Sarah Jane wondered. This isn't life insurance, Thomas said. The nurses sell hospital insurance to the loggers for 9 cents a day. The men are treated there at no charge if they have it.
What an idea, Colleen said. I've never heard of a hospital doing that.
As far as I know, this is the first one in Michigan to try it, Thomas said. Jerome is considering the possibility of providing it for all the men. As they went on talking of other things, I considered the changes that had come to North Branch since I had been here. Not all of them were to our advantage, but most had been for the better. I looked around at our dear friends and thought how fortunate we were to be a part of this community. Suddenly, I realized that Elizabeth was speaking to me. "Did you know that, Mabel?"
I know that look on her face,
Sarah Jane said.
She hasn't heard a word you've said.
Know what?
That Dr. Mason is getting an automobile. It will be the first one in town.
I hope he warns us to stay off the road when he goes out,
I said.
From what I've read, those machines scare the horses out of their senses. Why would he want a noisy thing like that anyway?
Speed,
Philip replied.
There were a number of them in Chicago, and you'd be amazed at how fast those machines can go.
I don't need to get anywhere that quickly,
I said.
Especially if there's a possibility I won't get there in one piece.
You ride on trains, Mabel, Elizabeth reminded me. They go faster than an automobile.
They're on a track that keeps them in place. When they put tracks in the road, I may try an automobile.
Dr. Mason and his motor car soon became a familiar sight around town. It was unusual enough so that we still ran to the window to see it when we heard the chug-chug, and Claire would race for the fence to wave wildly at the doctor as he went by.
I don't think we need to worry about speed on these roads,
Sarah Jane commented.
It's the unearthly noise the thing makes that unnerves me. You could never carry on a conversation with all that racket going on.
I'd be too scared to carry on a conversation,
I told her.
I think I agree with Gladys this time. Those things will never last.
A few days later, Claire asked if he could go visit Grandma Williams.
Alma is over playing with Jessica,
I told him,
and I haven't time to take you. I can go by myself. I know the way. I guess you could,
I said reluctantly.
You'll never be any safer than you are here in the country. I'll call Grandma and tell her you're coming. Be back in time for dinner, all right?
Claire started happily for the door, then turned with one last request.
Can I stay for dinner if they ask me? If they ask you.
It couldn't have been 10 minutes later that Ma Williams called me. Claire is here, she reported.
He couldn't be. He just left home a few minutes ago. He can't walk that fast.
He didn't walk. He came in Dr. Mason's automobile.
Oh, my!
I gasped.
Is he all right? How did he?
He said Dr. Mason stopped and asked if he wanted a ride. I don't know a boy in North Branch who would turn that down. I gather that we have lost a future farmer, too. Claire says he's going to build automobiles when he grows up.
I hope he lives to grow up,
I answered weakly. He's fine, Ma Williams assured me. He also said that you told him he could stay for dinner if we asked him. So I asked him. Len can bring him home when he comes for supper. Before either child could be returned home, I realized that the new baby was on the way.
Everyone is where they belong anyway,
Len said when he came for dinner.
I'll take some clothes to Sarah Jane's and Ma's. You call Dr. Mason, then go lie down. I'll be right back.
I have a little while yet,
I told him.
I'll straighten up here and fix something for your supper.
My intentions were the best, but by the time I had called the doctor, Sarah Jane, and Ma Williams, I knew that my little while had run out. Our second daughter had arrived before either Len or Dr. Mason appeared.
I hope this young lady isn't always in such a hurry,
Dr. Mason said.
You'll have your hands full.
Sarah Jane reported that Alma was delighted to have a new sister.
She told Jessica that it was a direct answer to prayer. Alma seemed to feel that if she hadn't intervened, another brother would have been inevitable. It's nice to see such faith in action. What are you going to call her?
Claire was just as sure that it would be a boy,
I replied.
He wanted to call him Claire, so we decided to call her Clarabelle. That should make both happy.
You've always been pretty good at keeping peace,
Sarah Jane laughed.
I'd like to have seen how you would have managed if it had been a boy.
Things went smoothly with this baby. She may have been more tranquil than the other two, or, as Ma suggested when she came to stay a week, perhaps it was that I now knew what I was doing. School began the first day of September, and Claire marched off proudly with Alma on the opening day. I was thankful for a new baby to take my mind off the empty house. The following week, Sarah Jane came over one morning to begin working on the grape juice and jelly. She regarded me silently as I finished putting away the breakfast dishes.
You're chatty this morning, I observed. Don't you know any news?
Oh, yes, she replied. Unfortunately, I do. You've apparently been too busy to notice it. She sounded so strange that I looked at her in alarm. I was somewhat relieved to see that she was choking to keep from laughing.
Well, tell me, does it have something to do with us?
I'm afraid so. She put her head down on the table and her shoulders shook with laughter.
Sarah Jane, anytime you're ready to share this good news?
I'm not sure it's good, she gasped, but there's no one I'd rather share it with.
Then stop guffawing and get on with it.
She wiped her eyes and leaned back in her chair. Our daughters have gone into business, she said.
What kind of business?
They're selling prayers. I don't know what I expected to hear, but nothing in my experience had prepared me for this.
They're selling what?
Prayers. Actually, Jessica is selling them. Alma is praying them. And they're dividing the proceeds. My knees gave way and I sat down in the closest chair.
Maybe you'd better start at the beginning.
I told you that Alma had assured Jessica that the baby was a sister because of her prayers. It sounded like too good a talent to waste, so Jess persuaded Alma to pray for a new dress for her before school started. Sam got wind of it and allowed as how he could use a nice pocket knife. Alma agreed to give it her best effort. Don't ask me how it happened, but Grandma Clark sent Jessica a dress and Grandpa Charles sent Sam a knife.
They told you this?
Oh, no, I found out quite by accident, Sarah Jane said. Jessica came home with candy in her pocket, and I asked where she'd gotten it. She said one of the fourth graders had given it to her. The next day, she had a new pencil and a jumping rope. Why are the children giving you these things, Jessica? I questioned her. Are you asking for them?
Well, no, not exactly.
And what exactly does that mean? She's selling them something, Sam put in.
You weren't supposed to say anything, Sam, Jess said. You promised.
Maybe we'd better sit down and talk about this, I told her. Just what are you selling? It turned out, Sarah Jane continued, that since 3 things that Alma had prayed for were granted, it seemed likely that whatever she asked would probably be given.
Oh,
I moaned.
I can't believe it. What is her father going to say?
Well, he's partially to blame. The children think that Alma is the logical one to offer this service since she's the minister's daughter. She supposedly had more experience with prayer.
But Sarah Jane, that's irreverent. It's a terrible thing to do.
Sarah Jane patted my hand. No, Mabel. If they were older than 7 and realized that one does not pray for profit, it might be. But all they've seen so far is the cause and effect. And the effect has been pretty spectacular. I think Len can explain the necessity of closing down the business. That evening after supper, Thomas and Sarah Jane and their children stopped in.
Mama says we have to give back the stuff we got,
Jessica said.
We can't charge anyone to pray for 'em.
She's right, Len said. I heard that you girls were starting a little, career at school. I'm glad you know how to pray and believe that God hears and answers you. But the Bible says that God gives freely of all things to his children. He doesn't ask any payment for the gifts he sends us. I know you didn't mean any harm. But you see why it wasn't a good idea, don't you? The girls nodded and Alma hugged Len.
I'm sorry, Papa. I won't do it again. And I'll give Jess back her hair ribbon. Jess?
I said.
What were you praying about for her? A new sister, Alma replied. But it's all right. I'll keep praying anyway. She helped me pray for mine.
No wonder Jesus said we must become as little children, Sarah Jane said when the girls ran off to play. We go out of our way to complicate our faith, don't we? Yes, Thomas replied. With about 1/10 that much, we could change the world. End of chapter 10.